Yeah, so before we start, as always, this is our fifth session of 6, and next week I'd like to ask you guys to share a little bit more, sort of, what's useful for you, what's, what you could have used more of, and things like that. So I'm going to ask for feedback just verbally, just to get a sense of that, because I find that if I send out something afterwards, there's less of a chance of hearing anything back. So today I just wanted to sort of ask you to kind of reflect upon that. You've already shared some of the things, like ideas that have been triggered through some of the conversations, and things like that. And today I'm going to start to transition a little bit into talking just in general terms about the concept of practice building, like we've done through this mini yoga tradition. And so we'll sort of start on that today. So are there any thoughts or comments or about anything we've done so far?
Well, I love it. I think it's been fabulous. I think you have such a unique background and education and perspective that you couple that with this tradition of yoga that I'm familiar with, and I think it's been wonderful. So
Okay.
I appreciate it.
And a general question too. So I've made available links to the recordings of these sessions, I call them the talking sessions, which is still a new format for me as a teacher to have this chance to really speak of my experiences, and also the integrated practices that I teach on Wednesday nights. Has anybody utilized the integrated practice recordings at all?
I have not.
No is a perfectly fine answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not
Okay.
either.
That's
I've
And-
done
okay.
some of the
Did not
other-
know they were available, so I'm gonna check out. I'm gonna look for them because I really want to follow along with them.
Okay, I'll send you the link, because that's a good thing as well. So I'd like to create ideally like a resource for people interested in these topics, that it's sort of a collection of discussing the ideas and then having the practices as well. So that's sort of my goal. And then really just to start engaging with Mirka on these topics, because she and I, every time we talk, we bring in our experiences together, and I think it makes for a very rich conversation on these topics. So
Well, and to that point, Tammy, I agree with Jackie. This has been really, really rich, and it's so wonderful to have another perspective on this tradition. And again, I agree with Jackie that you bring a whole different perspective given your background. And I feel like I'm not integrating as much of it as I'd like to, just where life is right now and what's happening. And I so appreciate all the resources that you're providing us. Unfortunately,
Right.
I'm not taking advantage of them like I would like to.
well, my goal is not to create more guilt.
Oh, no, I know. I'm not feeling guilty. I'm
No,
just feeling
good.
like I'm not, getting as
Yeah.
much as I know I could out of what we're doing. And so I really hope that at some point I can tap into some of that. So.
Well, and my hope too is, maybe even reaching out in the future to help reactivate this topic for you in different times. Because you all know that this is we always begin again. Anytime we can touch on the same topic for 50 years, and each time it will be a different experience. So
each time a little piece becomes more clear.
Good. And has the integration of the science topics been accessible for you guys, or has that felt okay?
No, very much.
No, it has been.
Yes, I
Great.
love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's important to me as a science communicator that I am trying to use language that I feel is more accessible, but sometimes I don't gauge that well. So that's a really good feedback. And today I thought I would share, so as we go into this topic, I also wanted to share a particular approach to a particular therapeutic practice as well. So, since you guys are on the level of practitioners that can, really, often when we teach people who are newer to the tradition, we don't sort of show them what's behind the curtain, show them what's behind, behind the sequencing and things like that. So the way I wanted to introduce the practice today is to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit to talk step by step what the intention is for the practice. Hi, Melanie, Catherine, welcome. Do you guys have anything to share before we start this evening or this morning, or really at sunrise for Catherine? Melanie just took a big breath, so. Melanie, I was thinking of you today because I wanted to start with Carl Jung, and Melanie is a therapist who works with people here, so I thought we would start there. And you know what, we'll start with, I'll share the screen because it's a bit of a quote, so let me see. Then you can sort of reading. Why is it? All right, where did my Zoom go? Okay. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So this
just-
quote, yeah, Lindsay just went sideways somehow.
Yeah, I turned it, sorry.
That's good. So the quote says, I think this is quite strong language, but I find it relevant to what I thought we would touch on today. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. They will practice Indian yoga and all its exercises, observe a strict regime of diet, learn literature of the whole world, all because they cannot get on with themselves and have not the slightest faith that anything useful could come out of their own souls. Which I think is a beautiful way to talk about this topic. So today, I wanted to focus on this idea of turning towards something that we perceive to be there. And so since this has sort of been revealing as a kind of a way to approach the strategy of Ashtanga Yoga, Patanjali, this method of practice, what we've done so far has talked about preparing our intentions for practice, preparing our attitudes, aligning our attitudes with the proper situation at hand, preparing our musculoskeletal circulatory systems, preparing our nervous system, and as Mirka said, or maybe it was Gary too, said, everything we do in a group class, for example, is really setting up the table. So we cook the food, we set out the nice dishes, we prepare everything, and then the turning towards silence is really the part where we enjoy the meal. So we enjoy the fruits of our preparation. So the first 4 of these steps is an action that we need to take. We need to cultivate an awareness. We need to move our bodies, use our attention to move through the system, move through our mind. But this last part, turning towards silence, the turning is an action, that making a choice to turn towards it, but that's where the action stops. And so on this path of Ashtanga Yoga, this is like the gateway to something different. So there's the levels where we are taking action, which feels much more comfortable to us as people, that we are used to doing things, we're used to action, we're used to having to do, but this idea of turning towards silence is something inherently different. And so the practice that we call, or the tools that we call, are a collection of tools referred to as pratyahara, which is often translated as sensory deprivation. So calming the sensory input, the sensory reaction of our system. So of course, this works with our meat body, with the nervous system and everything. But this is paying particular attention to the relationship we have to the input of our senses. And that relationship is the anchor to something that's beyond the action, something like what Jung is talking about, something where we start to be sensitive to and develop an awareness of something that he calls the soul. I'll call it, in this conversation, I'll call it silence. And so just to use an analogy of our actual senses. So sensory deprivation is not really what we do in pratyahara. What we're doing in this technique is shifting our relationship to our senses. And if we look at what's proper sensory deprivation is, it's much more extreme than that. So the example that I think is really interesting is in Washington State in the United States, a team of scientists under Microsoft have created the quietest room in the world. And the level of sound in this room is minus 20 decibels. And to give you a sense of what that number means, so human hearing goes down to 0 decibels. If you sit for a moment and listen to your breath quietly, that's about 10 decibels. If you whisper quietly, that's about 30 decibels. And anything below 0, we cannot hear. Minus 20 is how quiet this room is. That is so quiet. It's close to the sound of molecules bumping into each other. So minus 23 decibels is the sound created by molecules bumping into each other. So this room is incredibly quiet. There's no echo. And it's actually a room that people can visit as like a tourist as well. So there have been other quiet rooms, not quite this quiet, but they've just been used for research, pure research. So because they've also had people just kind of coming and going, they've been able to see some of the experiences of people in this situation where we really use technology to turn off sensory input. This is different than pratyahara, where we're working with the relationship. This is an external cutting off the senses. And some of the first things that happen, usually, so most people stay a few seconds in this room and then they need to leave. Some people stay a bit longer, maybe 30 minutes. Nobody, at least at the time I was reading about this, had stayed longer than an hour in this room. Because you notice things like the fact that sound is one of the ways we orient ourselves in space. So you lose the capacity to hear echo. So people get confused. You hear the sounds of your body. One of the researchers quoted in the article I was reading said he has some kind of valve in his heart, an electronic valve, and he can hear it in this room. And so this becomes very overwhelming very quickly for many people. On the other side, there are some people who feel overwhelmed with sensory input, who actually experience a level of calmness in this room, in this situation. So people who, he mentioned some people with ADHD or sensitivity to the sensory input find the situation more calming than most people. But it's it is a level of sensory deprivation we're not able to access in our practice. But the Pratyahara techniques are sort of pointing towards this. And something I don't think I've really heard this said before, but I think it's important. This idea of silence, we use it a lot in practice, that we sit in silence, we turn towards silence. Silence is sort of spoken as something that's calm, that's peaceful, that's something to be cultivated. But in reality, silence is not silent. If we turn off the sounds, we've just become aware of another level of sound that exists. And it doesn't just mean sound in the world, but all of the sensory. If there's a shutting of the eyes, we sometimes see images. A completely black room, our brain is still firing and triggering. So this concept of silence as an external or an even achievable human thing is non-existent. But what we can see as the senses and our reaction to the senses calms. So this is sort of the result of the kinds of practices we do in yoga, that the body, the nervous system can calm down. The reactivity to the sensory input can calm down. And then what happens, like each of those kinds of exercises is like stripping away a piece of noise. So that when we're left with the calm physical body, we're sitting naked then with our thoughts, which can be very uncomfortable for many people because, or it just can be interesting. So when the whole system is calm, the only thing that becomes noticeable is then this constant movement in our own mind, which may or may not be uncomfortable. For me, for example, every time I sit down to do my Zen practice, the way I know my mind has calmed down is because I am aware of a song that's on repeat in my mind. That's like my first step of every Zen practice. There's always a song in my head. I don't even know what the song is, but if I stop long enough, it pops up. And it's not necessarily anything I've heard in 10, 20 years, just a song. And then I watch it and it goes. But for some people, intrusive thoughts can be much more apparent in this quietness of the mind. So this calming of the senses is, I find, a natural result of the practices we do in yoga. And we'll do a couple of examples of some practices that are a little more tuned to that calming of the senses. But the part of Pratyahara that I think is most important is the fact that as the senses calm, you become much more aware of the activities of the mind. And so the Pratyahara and the inner practices of meditation, I think, are fundamentally linked, because our relationship with the activities of mind that arise, that come to the surface through the calming of the senses, is really where we have to make choices about how to proceed. So I'll share the story of a friend of mine who wanted me to support her in her health challenges through yoga. But she was dying. She had a terminal disease and she was not ready to accept that. And so as we did yoga together, for her, the calming of the senses triggered anxiety for her, because that quietness revealed to her that tremendous fear that she was living with. So her sitting, turning towards silence was not an appropriate practice in any way. So we developed strategies to help her feel calmness without allowing her to feel overwhelmed and losing herself in that silence that allowed her fears to be very apparent. So this practice of Pratyahara and moving towards this silence for us, those of us who are teachers who work with people, it's extremely important to keep this in mind, that this is not an appropriate practice for everybody at every point in their life. And even just ourselves, if there's a lot of strong emotions or strong thoughts, or we're dealing with a very difficult situation, that the moving towards silence may be less helpful to our practice at that point than not. But if the mind is sort of a typically active mind with our typical neuroses, we have the practices of focusing the mind in one pointed attention to help sort of wrangle some of those thoughts. But ultimately, being with those thoughts is this practice of pratyahara, being able to allow the senses to stay relaxed, being able to be with the noise that appears in the mind. And the idea is not to fix or change the noise in the mind, but what begins to arise, and what so many old texts, it's beautiful sometimes to read the ancient texts and find the experiences of your own practice being described to you. As you're able to keep the senses relaxed and be with whatever is happening in the thoughts, there arises an awareness that something else is there. And that something else is the good stuff that we can't quite put into words. So I'll give you an example of how I use this, deconstructed this kind of practice through the application of a particular issue that a couple of people working with me were dealing with. I'm not sure how the Americans pronounce this name, because I only have spoken about it in German in the last 20 years. It's the ringing in the ears, and I think the Americans call it
I was just going to ask
tinnitus.
that. Tammy.
Yeah.
Tammy, I was just going to ask that because I have ringing in my ears, and I'm thinking I need the background noise in order to keep
Yes.
that more at bay. And that's been on the tip of my tongue to ask if you had any feedback on where that goes. So sorry.
Yes, exactly. No, but thank you, Lindsay. That's exactly it. That's I think it's the best analogy, is this condition that you're living with. And just like in the meditative, in the, the thought related version of this, even with the sound, it depends on the quality and the intensity of the experience, because that it can be from very mild to really that's something that can consume your life. And so the clients that I work with have chronic ringing in the ears. Tinnitus is how we say it in German, so I'm just going to say it that way. And so one of these people is a very good friend of mine, and she's very practical, no nonsense, not too much into the esoteric things. I like that about her. So I began this by joking and saying, I'm going to teach you how to listen to the silence behind the sound.
Okay.
And yeah. You're like, yes, let's do it. So that's going to be the practice today. That's what we're going to do. And so it was using a combination of different techniques and a reframing, a pratipaksha bhavanam for the sutra people, of reframing this relationship, and also on a neurological level, attempting to use these techniques to create new neural pathways, because there's the root cause of what's happening, and then there's the chronic condition of the learned pathway through your brain that continues to propagate this. And so with tinnitus, there hasn't yet been a pharmaceutical solution. And even wonderful things like acupuncture has really just been as effective as placebo. So the most effective treatments for the condition are the kind of treatments that work really well with yoga, like cognitive behavioral therapy, masking the sounds, and sort of retraining, like using a biofeedback sort of thing. And that's that's generally the techniques that that I use. But and one thing in addition, well, in the realm of cognitive behavioral therapy and in the realm of yoga is really this cultivating a relationship with this experience, this a somatic experience of this relationship. Because also, you know, at least the friends that I worked with, the recommendation from the specialist was really was a distraction technique, was really trying to find ways to distract your mind from noticing this experience that's happening in the body. And the approach that I worked with these people and worked with myself as well when I went through a time of this problem was the opposite of that. It was turning towards the experience to find what the relationship is with it. And of course, this will be more or less effective depending on the situation of your own experiences. So we can go through sort of what the practice that I recommended to these people. But it's essentially an analogy of sort of what we're talking about, except with the mind. So let's just walk through the practice, and I'll sort of, instead of just doing a practice like a practice, I'll walk you through the different steps. I'm just going to spotlight this just for the recording purposes, so you guys can see me. So I'm going to bring in some other models that and Melanie is also familiar with this, so I can say something like the heart chakra, and people have an idea of what that means. So neck and shoulder tension can be, for some people, a trigger to tinnitus. So that's something that when we turn towards the body when working with this, we want to give some attention to. So working with ringing in the ears, there's, you know, something to consider is what's the intention of this kind of practice. For many of us living with this condition, fixing it and changing it may or may not be a reasonable intention to set, but a more realistic intention may be to understand what this experience is in the body and what my relationship with it is. Important for any chronic condition that we're living with. When Jackie and I spoke of hypermobility, you know, there's a recognition of this condition that I have, that it's a reality, that it's something that impacts me and my energy. And so as we look at working with a chronic condition, rather than thinking of fixing it, the intention is to look at the relationship with it first. And so it's not optimistic, it's not pessimistic, it's just a realistic turning towards this condition. And looking at my attitudes toward this condition, especially when we look at chronic conditions, there can be a lot of frustration, resentment, some painful emotions that come with that. And so we can ground ourselves in just seeing how we are responding to this reality. And especially early on, there's no intention of shifting that, but to begin with that awareness. And then the musculoskeletal system. So we have a large array of tools that you're all, as long-term practitioners, aware of. But thinking about the heart chakra and the throat in particular, because these two areas and practices we do with these two areas have an impact on tension in the neck and shoulders. So things like the practice we've done, being aware of the neck and the position of the head. So just simple things like checking in, dropping the chin, lifting the chin, And as we begin with a recognition of the sound that's alive in the ears, and with tinnitus too, there's those of us who've come to the condition through injury or some impairment. As we age, it is something that happens as our body changes. And so just notice how the condition is alive for you. And particularly as we work with older people, the reality that this is a condition that comes and goes or is there chronically is the truth. So just noticing chin dropping and lifting. So here we're not using the posture to change or fix anything necessarily. It's to create awareness of the sensations in the neck as we do simple movements. For those who are living with a constant ringing in the ears, keeping the attention also to notice any changes with the position of the head. And the standing sequence that we often do, we've done with Mirka quite a few times, and I have a version of the same kind of sequence where we are taking the fingertips to the chest, elbows forward, opening the arms wide. Exhale, wrap the arms around, drop the chin. Inhale, open. So awareness of the front of the chest and the throat, and an awareness of the back of the chest and the throat. So when we open the arms and lift the chin, there's an opening in the front. And as we wrap the arms around and drop the head, the back of the chest is opening. And then eventually let's stay here with the arms out. So again, this can be done in Tadasana or just sitting. Hold the arms out for a moment. Let the elbows be, so the arm be open, the elbow be open. Hypermobile people try not to hyperextend, extend through the fingers. See if you can get a sensation of a lengthening through the front or the underside of the arm through the fingertips. And then just look over to one side. Notice how that feels on the neck and shoulders, and come to the other side. So just gently and slowly letting the head turn. Keep your posture nice and lengthened up, sternum moving up towards the ceiling. And if it's appropriate for you to stay with your head turned to one side, keep your head turned to one side. So with the palm up, you're feeling more lengthening on the side you're looking away from, on the front side of the shoulder neck, with the shoulder externally rotated. You can internally rotate that shoulder joint, the one you're looking away from. Notice a shifting of where you might feel a feeling of stretching or lengthening on the other side, more towards the back of the neck, the back of the shoulder. And then eventually switch sides. So we do a nice version of this too, where it's more dynamic. This is a more static version. So you're looking to one side, the shoulder is externally rotated, feeling lengthening or stretching sensation from the neck, the shoulder. Noticing also the sensation as you internally rotate the shoulder by turning the back hand. If there's not much of a sensation here by just turning the hand, you can also bring that back hand to your low back, a little more of a movement. So those of us with really high range of mobility, larger movement might be more useful. And for some of us, a smaller movement. So just a simple check on the shoulders and release. We're going to do a little bit with the fingers. So the practices we'll do are going to involve the fingers. So we want to just have an awareness. Notice the circulation in your hands. Are we cold-handed today, or are the hands a little bit warm? And we're just going to take the elbow up to shoulder height on one side and the palm of the hand away from you. So this shoulder is nice and relaxed. We don't have to pull it up to the ear. So just take a moment, feel your posture nice and centered. And then just take the other hand and move the fingers back one at a time. Just noticing if there's a big difference in sensation from finger to finger. We'll do eventually all of them, even the thumb. You can also just take all of the fingers back. Elbows stay lifted up. You can play a little bit with the position, bringing this hand towards you or keeping it away from you. Yeah, Jackie, you have a lot of range of motion, so just play with, see where you find sensation. So those of us with a lot of mobility, it's finding sensation there's just, you're like, what? I'm not doing anything. So see if you can find that sensation. And then relax that arm and try the other side. Elbow about shoulder height, could be a little bit lower. And just feeling the fingers. Depending on how you spend your day, the response to this will be different as well. We have a mouse hand. We're using computers a lot. And then shake it out. And then just a few times, lifting the arms up and down. What I always say in my class is if the energy is strong, we have a German word, Kreislauf. If your Kreislauf is strong, you lift and reach, 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 reach. Really move the shoulder away from the hips and down. And if the energy is a little low, a little gentle, it's more appropriate to have a sensation as if you're swimming through the air. The arms are a little softer, the lengthening is not as extreme. So the muscular skeletal idea here is just to move the shoulders. Get the scapula activated, creating some more circulation. Working with the energy. And if it feels comfortable staying here just a few breaths. Lengthening if that's appropriate, lengthen, 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 reach, deep breathing. Release the shoulders and then come into some version of a relaxed forward folding position. So it can be child's pose on the floor, Uttanasana if you're standing, or a seated Uttanasana kind of position. Just let the neck be long, the back relax. And then come back to sitting. Beautiful. So we're going to do a couple of what are kind of pratyahara techniques. But this is how I practice them and how I guided some practitioners to work with it. So first, we're just going to come into the breath and do some simple pranayama. And you've all experienced, Catherine probably as well, though I don't know if Mirka was doing this with your group, this spiral breathing that Mirka does, counting on the finger joints. All right. You can do the spiral breathing if that's something that's been integrated into your practice. One of the techniques I've used with people who haven't spent a lot of time doing that technique is to simply have the tip of the thumb on the root of the finger. And as you inhale, slide the thumb tip to the fingertip and exhale down. Well, this is what we did actually, I think, the first session here. So this, or the spiral breathing, whatever it is, we want to bring some attention to the fingers and the thumb. So we're going to take 12 breaths, either spiral breathing, counting the 12 that Mirka's taught many of us, or just 3 times on each finger. Inhale, slide up. Exhale down. So just take a few minutes, 12 breaths. Doesn't have to be the deepest breath in the world. Just feel the body open and notice the quality of your breath. So it's like a conversation with the body. How is the breath? Is the body wanting a deep, deep breath? Is it wanting the breath to be a little more gentle? Notice the attention to the tactile sensation of the fingers and thumbs touching. If you're living with a constant ringing in the ears, just be aware that it's with us. If you notice any changes to the quality of the experience, just be aware of it. And then let it continue to be with you. And as you complete 12 breaths, you can just let the breath settle back to a more natural, normal, everyday rhythm. And then we'll continue to stay with the sensation of the fingers and hands. And we'll just begin with the left hand. We'll wrap the palm of the right hand around the left thumb. So you can hold tightly and slowly a little bit looser. The hands can sort of rest here. I'll just hold them up here to show you. So let the shoulders be relaxed. And what you're looking for is simply the sensation of the pulse of your thumb in the right hand. So for some of you, the thumb might be very easy to feel the sensation of the pulse. For others, it might not be very palpable right now. Notice the temperature of the thumb. Is it warm? Is it cold? And just notice if you can feel the pulsation. And if the pulsation comes easily and is very noticeable, just stay with that sensation for a moment or two. I describe it as a feeling like the pulsation is expanding. So whatever level you're aware of that thumb, just stay with that and be patient. When you feel satisfied with the sensation on the thumb, then move to the left index finger. Being aware again of how it feels for the right hand to hold on to the left index finger. If you can sense the pulsation of the finger, the pulse, if it comes easily or takes a little more time. And just one by one, move through all the fingers on the left hand. At your own pace. Being attentive to the differences, the different fingers. As you reach the little finger of the left hand, just do the same exercise on the right hand. And again, noticing just the quality of the pulse beating through one finger, the warmth or coldness of the fingers and the hands. Notice if you try to diagnose the differences you will observe, or if you just let it be. This particular exercise can be quite interesting over a period of time, day-to-day fluctuations. Continue going at your own pace. And whenever it is that you complete both sides, we'll do the Ganesha Mudra on both hands. So this is just for me visually to see where you are, those of you with the camera on. with the Ganesha Mudra. Once you're there, just see if you can stay with it long enough to feel that sensation, if possible, the pulsation of the fingertips of one hand in the palm of the other. On both hands. Yeah. This is the mudra that I learned from Mirka, associated with the heart chakra. And then release a moment. And just notice now the sensations of the hands. If there's a difference in temperature or sensation. And then the next part of the practice, let me switch cameras here so I can be on the floor a little more easily. So we'll move towards the floor. So we're gonna connect with something called Shanmukhi Mudra, but I'll share with you the way that I've practiced it when I practiced over a long period of time. And it's just a practice. The way I practice it is not sitting, it's reclining. So we're just going to transition to lying down. So just take a moment or two, feeling the spine, the hips, the back. So just a few rounds of Chakravakasana since we've been sitting for a few minutes here. And then ideally, we'd like to be able to lie down on the back in a way that feels comfortable, with maybe a cushion or a nice folded blanket, maybe two of them if you have them nearby, and I'll explain why. So Shanmukhi Mudra is the crazy yoga mudra. That's what I'm going to call it. So it's a symbolic mudra of sensory deprivation. So you'll see pictures of some of the old yogis doing this mudra with a crutch under each arm to sort of keep the elbows up. I found that not fighting gravity was a little easier, so I just did this lying down. So the position of the hands. Put this one back. So the position of the hands is the pinky at the edges of the mouth, ring finger, the edges of the nose, the middle finger sort of just under the eye towards the nose, the index finger on the other side of the eye. So not, these fingers aren't pressing on the eye, they're just on the edges, sort of over the lashes, I would say. And the thumbs go into the ear. So you're gonna have to wait on that last part. So just feel for a moment with the thumb in the ear. Shanmukhi Mudra. So you can do this sitting up, but the arms tire quite quickly. And I found that staying with this posture for a few minutes creates a different sensation. So I'll explain this in words, and then we'll just stay 5 minutes in this position. So when the thumbs are in the ears, they're not pushing too hard and they're not too soft. So like when you were holding the finger, if you hold it too hard, you can't really, the blood doesn't flow. And if it's too soft, the connection is not strong enough to sense that pulsation. So with the thumb sort of blocking the air from moving into the ears, your ears start to pick up the sound of the circulation up through your thumbs, basically. And that sound, described in one of Krishnamacharya's books, he said something like the roar of the ocean. So it's very similar to holding a shell up to the ear. So the way I've guided this mudra in the practice of ringing ears, Because when you close out some of the sounds, the tinnitus wakes up sometimes. So just be aware of that awakening of the tinnitus. And then take your attention as much as possible to the sound of the circulation through the ears. And if you can bring your attention there, you can use the somatic experience and your imagination to feel as if this sound is expanding through your body. That's sort of the first level of this. And with time, it became a practice that deep sound, inner sound of my body began to overwrite the high-pitched sound of the tinnitus in the ear. So just notice the interaction, if there is one, between the ringing in the ears and this deeper sound of the ocean roaring. And so what I'll do is I'm just going to set a timer for 5 minutes. I'll mute myself in these 5 minutes and just hold this position for 5 minutes. And so I'll start in just a minute or two. So if anybody has any questions or anything's not clear, there's space to ask.
Can you show us the placement of your hands again?
Yeah. So pinkies at the edges of the mouth, the ring finger here, not blocking the nostrils, but just to the side of the nostrils, under and to the side. The ring finger sort of just touching the bridge of the nose, sort of, for me, I cover the eyelashes. The index finger sort of on the other side of the orbit of the eye, and then the thumb in. And so if you're lying back, for many of us, most of us, the elbows might need a little support, like a pillow under the elbows, keeping them this way. If you're very open in the shoulders, like Jackie, you might not need anything because the shoulders can naturally do. But to keep the hands in this position, I find I need a little bit of lift of the shoulders. Otherwise, I end up sort of pulling my face to the side like this. So the touch is gentle. You're not pulling on anything. And the thumb isn't pressed in really hard or hanging out. There's sort of a sweet spot of contact where the air to the ear is closed off, but the circulation of the thumb and in the ear is allowed to flow. All right, so I'm just going to set a timer, and I'll do my best to call you back if you can hear me. So enjoy the exploration. So if you've heard the bell, just take a moment to come out. If you've not heard the bell, well, we'll see you at some point. So stretch and find your breath, and as you feel ready, come back to sitting. So this practice it's intended to be a progression. This experience, so everything preparing for that time of coming into this mudra, which you can stay progressively longer. And initially what I've done is ask people to notice the sound, to feel the sound, cultivate that relationship to the sound, and then notice the interaction between that deep sound and the sound you experience with the ringing in the ears for a period of time. And then the technique that I used and I guide my clients to use was to see if, notice the sound, the silence behind those sounds, which is a completely esoteric idea. I don't even know what I mean by that. But I know that when I've used that idea, it shifted my relationship with this experience of hearing. And something shifted. So, and you know, the friend of mine who I told this esoteric idea to, she messaged me one day. She was on vacation somewhere, maybe a year after we had done this. I'd introduced her to this practice. And she wrote me a message from somewhere in the forest and said, I'm listening to the sound or the silence behind the sound. And she got it, like something awoke in that. And it didn't necessarily make the ringing go away, but it gave her a feeling of relaxation, of feeling of letting go, and really changing the experience of what she was living with and what she is living with. So that's how we use this. And before I asked Lindsay in particular how it was, so like we said with meditation, if the experience of the ringing of the ears is very overwhelming, this practice may not be useful or appropriate. It may just create suffering. So it's very important to recognize that. But in the larger context of this sort of turning towards silence, this concept of saying that's behind the noise of our own thoughts, this brings us to the precipice of what we call faith. That moving towards this untouchable thing, it really can trigger a very primal response, whether of ecstasy or fear. But you know, this is really where we need, where many of us need the insertion of an identity of that silence. You know, the beautiful strategies of Father Keating in the Christian tradition of contemplative prayer, pointing to this idea. You're not thinking about, you're not focusing on prayer, you're sitting with God. So this image of silence in his tradition being God, whether we call it the true self, whether we call it Purusha in the Sankhya tradition, is this idea. And since we're speaking with people who are also connected with this lineage of Vinyasa Yoga, TKV Desikachar was very inspired by the philosophy of Krishnamurti, who was also inspired by Desikachar. So you can see a lot of interlap between the two traditions. And there's this great quote from him that says, one cannot come through any organization, any creed, any dogma, priest, or ritual, not through a philosophical knowledge or psychological technique. She has to find this experience of silence. She has to find it through the mirror of relationship, through understanding the contents of her own mind, through observation and not through intellectual analysis or introspection. So this idea that this listening to the silence behind the sound, it's not something in the purview of any particular faith. It's something we have to, as naked, stripping down ourselves and sitting with that. And whatever techniques we use can bring us to a certain point, but to be with that silence is a very personal, intimate experience beyond the creed. But if we need support, that's really the role of these traditions. This is really the role. And what I reflected on, I shared this earlier today on social media as I was writing it, because it's to me, this relationship with this silence, we can see that sensation of silence can be perceived as something that's separate from ourselves or something that's part of ourselves. So in Sankhya, we have Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is untouchable in this material world. So there's dualistic thinking and then there's non-dualistic thinking. And being the person I am, what came to me is how we consider modern physics, where we had a realm of what we call classical mechanics, how things move in this world, developed by mathematicians and credited to Isaac Newton, Newtonian theories of how things work. And this theory of how things work assumes that everything is moving on sort of a background reference frame. So time is something that exists in the way that we experience it, progresses forward. And it's as if there's a canvas on which the physical world is moving. And if you have this static canvas, you can figure out how things move. And then fast forward to the early 20th century, Meleva and Albert Einstein proposed some radical ideas about the speed of light. This had an impact on how we understand time. And this evolved into what's known as the general theory of relativity. And in relativity, there's no background canvas. A concept called space-time was created through this theory. Space-time is this background canvas, and it's actively involved in the motion of the stars, if you will, the motion of the cosmos and the universe. So this idea of the relationship with the silence is, however we perceive it to be, separate from ourselves or as an integral part of our lives, is this deeper relationship where I think the Ashtanga practices and this more inward focus practice is really taking us. And I think this relationship can be defined for you, but my idea with this inquiry yoga is to really support us in moving towards this investigation on our own, to see what this experience is with this non-tangible, non-speakable, non-intellectual concept of something that we perceive when we sit with this noisy silence in which we live. So the practice was just on the ears, but I find the ears to be a great sense to work with. But similar practices for all of the senses to reawaken and reevaluate the relationship with those senses. So I'd like to hear from you guys, particularly Lindsay, how was that practice for you? Was it agitating, or was it comfortable for you to work with?
It was okay because on the whole spectrum of this, I can forget about it during the day. So, I
Okay.
mean, so I'm not, it's not in my face all the time where I'm really, really, really bothered by it. But it's always
Mhm.
kind of there in the background. But if I get
Mhm.
involved with something, then I can forget about it. So
Okay.
I was able to hear the body sound, or whatever you want to call it, somewhat.
Mhm.
And then I would hear the ringing in the ears. So I
Mm.
experienced a little bit of not hearing the ringing in the ears. So
Mhm.
it was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I found that too. There's like there's a relationship in my experience with those sounds. Like there's an interaction that happens with the shifting of attention there. So if this is something you work with in the future, I'd love to hear your experiences.
yeah,
I find that
I
getting
mean,
people to work with it is my challenge. I need guinea pigs. Like I just want people to do it so that they can tell me like what, because you know I have a data point of 1, which is not very valuable. I need more data points.
is it inappropriate to ask that you might send out that sequence for us, just
Of
so
course,
we
yeah.
have, and then that also I would be interested in that relationship to silence thing that you had out earlier today too. But this is
Yeah.
just a whole
Yeah.
different way of looking at this, and it's just enlightening actually. So thank you
Great.
very much. Yeah. And
Thank
I'd be
you.
curious to, for a non-ringing in the ear person, what what was it like for them?
Is there any person without ringing in the ears that is there anyone on this group? All right. So Lori, how was that for you then?
I just found it incredibly calming. It was like you were talking about earlier with like you were holding a shell up to your ear and that ocean, that sound.
Mhm.
And at some point, I just felt like there was no sound, that it just
Ooh,
kind of disappeared. And then I thought
cool.
about it, and then it sort of came back. But it was incredibly calming.
Mm.
I'm going to work with that a little bit. It was,
Mm.
and again, this whole idea around pratyahara is just, and how you're approaching this is really,
Mm.
yeah, this is just one sense, but
Yeah.
I just had an amazing sense of calm during that practice. So
Excellent. Yeah, and you know, Mirka gave a sweet addition to this as well. As I was telling her, you know, it felt like the sound was filling up my head. And she said, imagine you can guide that sound into your heart. And that became a very big experience, just adding that visualization of you know, because when we practice like Lotta, like you pointed out many times in the Qigong practice, we try to bring the energy to the center. And so it was that image of, you know, this energy in the head being brought down a little lower, a little more grounding. You know, so as you play with this, I find that experiences come up and yeah, and change. Okay. Anybody else?
Dash. So thank you, Tammy. I look forward to next week.
Bye, Lori. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Lori. I thought it was really calming too. And I think having the fingers on my face added to that after having done that really tactile exercise practice with the fingers. So that it felt kind of like being underwater, but the added dimension of hearing my circulation was the really amazing part. But yeah, very calming.
Okay.
And when we did this finger, you know, holding on to each finger, I felt like I was holding on to 5 distinct living little sticks. You know, I didn't feel like they were connected to my hand. It felt like 5 different, it was very,
Oh, very nice.
yeah, very interesting.
Well, and remember, with the nadis, like these are where the nadis begin,
Yeah.
in the tradition. So this is really the heart of the energy system. Anybody else? Heather, you look like you're waiting to share some thoughts.
Yeah, I enjoyed that very much. I noticed the ringing that I don't usually notice. I noticed it very subtly. And like you had guided us, try to put your awareness into the silence behind that, which helped. My thumbnails are kind of long, so they were a little distracting at first, and it caused this feeling of, real intense feeling of I need to get up and clip my thumbnails. I have this real kind of OCD perfectionism as a part of me that kind of spurs on anxiety, and so it was this kind of rush of anxiety, and I breathed through it and I adjusted my thumbs, and I could come back to a place of feeling at ease again. And then as I was listening to my breathing, I was thinking about, this is the noise that we hear in the womb. We hear our mother's breathing, we hear her blood flowing. It's very noisy inside the womb. And so I thought that was very interesting to think of the relationship of silence and noise and us in the womb, in this very, very nourishing and calming place of silence, and at the same time noise that we start out in, that we grow in. And so that just kind of came to my mind, that idea and that existence. So
Thank you. And this practice was developed when my second child was about as old as Shanti.
Oh.
And she's a very powerful human being, and she got that power from my body because she took it all with her. And part of the depletion that I experienced of that was the beginning of tinnitus. So this practice arose out of that depletion that I didn't realize at the time how depleted I was until I had a cascade of health issues. But in the recovery from that, addressing the sound, and I found this practice to be very calming for the nervous system, even though part of the depletion was the constant touching of being a mother of young kids. There's always somebody on your body, and some aspect of that disrupted my own sensations of my body. And so this was really, for me, a way of bringing that together. So so very appropriate for the time in your life, at least on my experience.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Lotta, thank you for dropping in at the end there. So Lotta dropped in as I turned off my microphone and all the sounds, and I was a little confused. So there were some messages going back and forth.
So sorry, I missed the first hour.
No. Well, it'll be there for you. We're recording now, so you'll have it all. Okay. Melanie, Catherine, anything to share, or? Go ahead,
I
Mel.
would like to say something. Okay. It was so interesting because I usually do the spiral breathing, and today I had a feeling of let's try this, and the senses felt so intense doing this. It was great. And afterwards with the mudra, with the hand, I felt nothing, really nothing. There wasn't anything. And afterwards with the mudra, it was like the pulse was getting through the whole upper body. So it was calming on one hand and energizing on the other. If you know what I mean. It was
yeah.
Very
Because
interesting.
you can stimulate the parasympathetic system. So it's bringing energy, but calming energy.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a
So-
strategy in pranayama. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was quite interesting. And so I'm not, I don't have issues with ringing in the ears, but I know a lot of people. So I can imagine that this is very helpful for, getting another relationship, another emotional relationship to the noise. Yeah.
Mhm.
Another association, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah, and this, don't worry about this if it's not there. What I've only taught this a few times in group classes,
Yeah.
and everybody says, and then like I realized afterwards, like half of the people that have your experience, like I feel nothing, and then some people are like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I have no pulse. So yeah, it comes with attention. It's just an attention.
Yeah.
May I ask a
because if you're-
question?
Yes,
May
go
I
ahead,
ask a
Lotta.
question? I understand some of you have ringing in your ears. Do you people feel the pulse very strong in the fingers or not? Or weak?
That would be Heather and Lindsay. Did you feel strong sensation or a
Or weak or
It's
nothing?
weak sensation?
And some of the fingers I felt stronger, but probably
Mhm.
average, not necessarily strong, but not weak, somewhere in between. But it changed
Okay.
from finger to finger.
Okay.
And Lindsay?
I had a sense, but not always. The other thing that I've noticed that I'm not aware of mostly is that my hands are cooler than they used to be. And I don't know whether
Mhm.
that has a relationship as to whether you can feel the pulse or feel a sensation more or not, if your hands are warm or if they're cold.
I'm so interested because I'm into Chinese medicine and I see you are more like a deficiency syndrome and you Heather more like an excess syndrome. So you Heather should feel very much or more and you should feel less. So I just had to check it out.
Interesting. Thank
No
you.
diagnosing in yoga classes. And Catherine, how was your experience with this practice?
So I struggled a little bit. Well, it's interesting because I'm using a noise canceling headphone to connect. So I had to take the noise canceling headphone off to do the experience. I had a really hard time doing the mudra, finding a position where I could actually sustain it. So I ended up just having my 4 fingers on my eye with my thumb in the ear. And so to be honest, mostly I was noticing all the sounds that I wasn't hearing because I was focusing on the conversation and with this noise canceling headphone. Because it's right at the moment where the birds start to sing and all the traffic starts. So it's an experience that I probably need to come back to. Earlier when we were holding the fingers, I was distracted by my heart. And it could be related to the fact that I'm wearing the noise canceling headphone.
That's
But
interesting.
my heartbeat was so loud that I could not feel things in my fingers. So that was my experience.
So you have like a mini sound deprivation chamber on your ears, creating
Yeah.
sensation. That's really interesting. Oh, I haven't thought of that. That is a very interesting, yeah. And I don't know if it's cheating. I have adaptations to Shanmukhi Mudra as well. So like what you did because for me, what I was playing with was really this experience of the thumbs. So one of the ways that I found to be able to do this reclining is to reverse the fingers this way. But I found it's less efficient. Like the intensity of the sound is deeper and more powerful when I do it this way. But I have done it this way as well. So something to, if it's a practice that you find worth exploring, you have my permission to cheat to whatever way serves you best. So it's already 6:30. That was a really quick practice session for me. So we can close our group official gathering, and if there's any other questions or comments or things like that, I can stay on a little bit longer for anybody who'd like to share. Oh, and the babies are back. So thank you all very much, and keep learning. Next week, I will ask your thoughts. So this was great that everybody shared a little bit today, and that was really wonderful for me to hear the experiences that each of you are doing. And Lindsay, I can write a little sketch version of this practice, and I will give you all the links to this recording as well, so that you can, maybe I can even cut the practice out as well, so you can have just the practice by itself.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay.
May I have it
Yeah.
also? May I have it also, Tammy, because I am having a patient coming in with tinnitus.
Mhm.
So maybe if he's interested, it could be of use. If it's
Yes,
okay
of course.
for you.
Yes, I'll share. Yeah, I'll share it with everybody. I'll stop the recording now.